Okay, let's continue with the senses, all right? And going on, starting, I think I'm going to have a lecture on each one of the different senses, starting with the chemical senses. Gustation is one chemical sense, and this means that these receptors are chemically gated. They bind to chemicals. So gustation is the name for taste. Taste receptors and basic papillae on your tongue. They have basal and supporting cells, along with the actual sensory receptors. Now, that was, what's that? Oh, this is the pain pathway again. This is left over from pain pathway. Okay, so here's your tongue, your taste buds, and little taste buds along the base of these papillae on your tongue, and there's little gustatory cells. Those are the actual receptors. Here's the primary sensory nerve. It's picking up those. Then you have these replacement, these supporting cells and basal cells, which can actually replace the taste buds. So we're going to learn that in, it's really rare to be able to replace neurons. Neurons are not replaceable, they're amitotic. They, once you lose one, that's it. But for a couple of places, one we learn in the brain, hippocampus, you can actually make new cells in the hippocampus. And olfactory and gustatory receptors. They die, you can replace them. And they're nerve cells, so it's unusual, right? All right, there are 5 taste sensations: salty, sweet, sour, bitter, and umami. Salty, produced by metal ions, sodium, potassium. You don't have to know where it is, lateral motions of tongue. Sodium, potassium, and these are all important for different reasons. Salty is important because sodium, potassium, they're kind of important. If you remember from the nervous system, it's really important. Most of us get too much sodium, but it's a really important. It's a rising depolarization phase of the action pendulum. Potassium is the repolarization, so they're really important. So if you get low on them, you get this salty. You have this sensation that you like to get something salty. So salty tells you that the sodium, potassium are in this food. Sweet, sugar, calories. You get something sweet, and at one time, calories were hard to find. You found something sweet. How many things in nature are really sweet? You know, honey. So it tells you, oh, there's a lot of good calories there. Sour, acid in fruits. And what is that associated with? Well, what about vitamin C? What's that? Vitamin C is an acid. I forget what it's called now. Anyway, it's sour. When it's sour, and vitamin C is a critical essential nutrient. We can't make this stuff. And without it, we get scurvy, which is a really bad way to die. So if you get something sour in some fruit, you're thinking, oh, this is vitamin C. So this is a good thing. Bitter, associated with spore food and poisons. Many poisons are bitter. So this is the indication that this thing might be spoiled, might be poisonous. It's time to spit it out. Right? So that's a taste. That's a warning. And then umami is the latest one. Umami is a Japanese word that means yummy. It's a meaty taste produced by amino acids, and that's really important because in nutrition we're going to learn that there's 20 amino acids you need to make proteins. In human nutrition, half of them, or maybe 9 or so, are what are called essential amino acids. We can't make them. We have to get them in our food. So we get this meaty taste, and of course, meat has all of the essential amino acids. So if you get a meaty taste, you're getting the essential amino acids. So that's a good thing. So it's evolutionarily, these are all really 4 really important, meaningful sensations for good health. Okay, projection pathway taste. Cranial nerve 7, 9, and 10 to solitary nucleus and medulla oblongata. Then the nuclei in hypothalamus and amygdala, and onto the thalamus. Finally, to cerebral cortex and conscious awareness of taste. So certainly goes to the initial area, and then it goes to the association area that you can associate. Okay, this is a taste sensation. Okay, what am I tasting? Or what is it I'm tasting? Okay, then smell, olfaction. Olfactory receptors and olfactory mucosa on the roof of the nasal cavity. Right? And these are really nerve cells, they're really brain cells. They're the only place your brain is really exposed to the external environment. And that's where certain things can infect your brain through that nasal epithelium, which we talked about before. So first of all, here's the gustatory pathway first. 1, primary neurons extend from gustatory cells to cranial nerves 7 and 9, synapse and nucleus solitarius of the medulla oblongata. 2, secondary neurons travel from the nucleus solitarius and synapse in the thalamus, third order neurons to the cerebral cortex and conscious awareness. So remember, 3 sensory neurons in the pathway, like almost all other sensory pathways: primary, secondary, and tertiary sensory neurons. Okay, so in olfaction organs, the receptor cells, they're in olfactory hairs and the olfactory epithelium in your nasal passages, nasal sinuses. There's also supporting cells and basal cells, and these are replacement cells. Like I said, you can replace these nerve cells, these olfactory receptors, you can replace them. And then these nerve cells send their axons through the cribriform plate in the ethmoid bone to what's called the olfactory bulbs. And they synapse with certain cells called mitral and tufted cells. And in that little nucleus is called a glomerulus. And they synapse with the secondary cells called mitral and tufted cells. And they send their axons into the brain via cranial nerve 1, olfactory. So here's a nasal epithelium right here. It's a mucus layer. Here's the odor molecules that come in, get stuck in the mucus. Here they are, the olfactory hairs on the dendrites of the olfactory receptors, sends their axons up through here, through the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone, into the olfactory bulb here, where the tufted cells and mitral cells are, and that's where they're synapsing in these olfactory glomeruli. And then here's the basal cells that are replacement cells, and then supporting cells next to their olfactory receptors, and they send their axons of the mitral and tufted cells into the olfactory nerve. I think that's a misnomer. It shouldn't be called a tract. It's a nerve. Not until it gets into the central nervous system, it becomes olfactory tract. So the only neurons directly exposed to the environment, one of few neurons that can replace. Neglarii folia. Here's one of the problems with the only really part of your brain that's exposed to the outside. It's because of this amoeba right here. It's very rare. You have to have stagnant water shoved up into your nose, and if this amoeba is in those, the amoeba can enter the olfactory cells, go up to the olfactory bulbs, enter your brain through the olfactory nerve, and start eating out your brain. And usually people die from that. And it's people who get this, it's a bad idea to swim in stagnant water or get stagnant water shoved up your nose. Every once in a while, this kid who's playing out on some kind of dirty water dies from this brain infection. And some people survive, but most people die from it. It's bizarre, but it exists. Each receptor cell has olfactory hairs that have membrane proteins that bind airborne molecules. So they, like enzymes, bind a substrate. They bind to it, and that stimulates the receptor potential in the olfactory neuron, which leads to an action, potential in the axon, and it goes into the olfactory bulbs. It's the oldest sense, right? And it's relatively poor in humans compared to other mammals. It's very sensitive, but it's other mammals have very, very sensitive, like dogs, for example. They can smell. They live in this olfactory universe that we can't even conceive of, because their sense of smell is so much better than ours. We have become much more visual and much more auditory than olfactory creatures. Females are more sensitive than males. They have a better sense of smell than males. I'm not sure why. This was shown to me one time when I came home. I was living with a couple of guys, and one of their girlfriends came by, and she was standing outside the house and saying, "What's going on?" He says, "Well, there's a gas leak in the house. I just called the gas company. There's a gas leak." Really? I walked inside. I couldn't smell any gas. She did, and she was right. They came over and they found a gas leak. So females have a more sensitive sense of smell than males. About 300 different types of receptors to identify, but we can detect several thousand different odors with only 350 types of receptors. And this is because of the gestalt of the experience. So you have all these receptors lined up, and a particular odor molecule comes along. And one receptor binds it really strongly, so it produces a big receptor potential that causes a higher frequency of action potentials in that olfactory receptor. This other receptor just barely binds it, doesn't bind it well, just barely binds it, makes a much smaller receptor potential, sends a smaller frequency. Other ones may do it medium. And that whole gestalt of those several receptors, each one responding in a different way to the same odor molecule, gives you the sensation of this particular smell. While another odor molecule can come along and it binds to other ones that weren't bound at all by this first one. And then also, maybe the one that was really affected by the first odor molecule was barely affected by the second one. So now we got a different array of odor receptors that are responding in different ways with different frequencies to give us all these different thousands of smells, but only using about 350 different types of receptors. Some odor instances stimulate nociceptors. You can breathe in some things like capsaicin that can really cause pain in your olfactory epithelium. So that there are nociceptors there also. Projection pathway. Primary fibers to olfactory lobes. Synapse with mitral and tufted cells in glomeruli. To temporal lobe and the primary olfactory cortex. And it goes to the cerebral cortex without going through the thalamus. There's the one sense that doesn't go through the thalamus at all. And so remember, almost all sensory pathways go through the thalamus, except one pain pathway, collateral pain pathway, but the rest of the pain goes through the thalamus. And olfaction does not go through the thalamus. It goes into the limbic system. It's the most emotional, if you want to think of it that way, of all the senses. And the sense that can really bring back huge memories, because the hippocampus is part of the limbic system. And olfaction goes right through there. And so, and the amygdala is there, and the hippocampus. And so it goes through the oldest part of the cerebrum. It is the oldest sense. From primary to olfactory association areas, the limbic system into hypothalamus. So information goes to three places: cerebral cortex for recognition, hypothalamus for visceral relations to odors, and amygdala to emotional reactions to odors. Oh, and that's, did we give the picture of the, no, of the pathway? So now we're on the hearing equilibrium. That was a really short one. I'm gonna stick with that one for just the chemical senses and go on to hearing and equilibrium in the next video. So this is going to be 203 senses 2, a short one. All right, and so I'll catch you in the next video.